I've done the same thing. Like, I went down the same path as my aunt, and because she was addicted to methamphetamines, and I was doing the same thing. And it got very, very bad after that. I mean, that's how addiction is. You make these justifications where you're like, well, as long as I'm not doing this, or as long as I'm not shooting up, or as long as I'm not stealing, as long as I'm not doing this, then I'm okay. It's like I'm better. I don't know how to explain it. Like, you just feel like you're a little bit better of an addict than the next, which is it's just a way to try to justify your use.
Welcome back to another episode of the Mile 40 podcast. Man, I can't say how incredibly grateful I am for every single one of you week in, week out. The guests just continue to inspire me, and I'm sure if they're inspiring me, they're definitely touching you all, the listeners. If you haven't already, please be sure to hit subscribe, whether you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, if you're watching along on YouTube. It goes a way in helping us grow the show. Also, be sure to check out the show notes. There is a discount code if you want to pick up your copy of Audacious or Break Barriers. Today's guest is Katelynn Ledford-McCoy. She's a beacon of resilience and inspiration, hailing proudly from the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. Her journey is a testament to the transformative power of overcoming adversity. Drawing from her own experiences of triumph over darkness, Katelynn now serves as a guiding light for others on their own paths of self-discovery and growth. Her story is a testament to the idea that even in our brokenness, we can harness our pain to fuel our purpose. Katelynn, I purposely cut that bio in half because I know we have a lot to dive into today. So first and foremost, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm super pumped, just knowing like what your podcast is about and the stories that you kind of get into. I'm excited. I'm honored. And I'm just ready to have a good conversation with you.
So, I know at a surface level a good amount of your story, and I am sure that if you were to write a book on your journey, it would be chapters and chapters long. And so with a story like yours, it's really difficult to understand where to begin sometimes. And so let me kind of turn and ask you this question. If you were to write a book about your journey, have you given that any thought, and perhaps what you would title it? Or is there a specific way you would describe your journey? Is there any, phrase that comes to mind around your particular journey?
Well, I mean, immediately, just the phrase beauty from ashes kind of came to mind. I do think that there are some very dark parts to my story. And wow, I'm already about to get emotional. But so, yeah, if I was to title a book, that was actually a trauma focus, like a real intense training that I used to do. And that was the name of it. And I just really have always loved that, because with anything that I've been doing within my life, I've been pulling a lot of hope and inspiration, even from the dark, messy pieces of my life. And I've just continued to place myself and surround myself and to work with people who also come from similar backgrounds to just really try to be a positive outlet in their life, to be a light in their life, to try to help them to really learn who they are and how they can take that brokenness or the really difficult parts of our stories, and to look at that and actually use that to harness strength from it, power from it. And so to answer your question, that's probably what I would name my book.
I love that. And, we are going to, work backwards here and get into, your story and some of the adversity that you faced and those dark moments. But I want to ask you, this attitude that you extend now, right? That this mission to help others and to show others that it's possible to triumph over darkness. I can only imagine that, when you were going through your adversity, that you probably didn't care too much about, helping other people during that time. But I do always kind of think about where that essence comes from, that essence to want to take what you've learned through your negative experiences and shining a light on others. And I feel like a lot of times we suppress that desire to help others when we're going through our own, weak moments, and when we're going through our own adversity and our own darkness. Uh, but and it's easier, obviously, to shine a light on it once we make it to the other side and say, I made it to the other side. Now let me kind of use what I've learned to help, other people. But, at any point before you got into the pits of, the despair of your journey, was anyone trying to help you out? Were there people around you? And maybe this could kind of segue us into talking a little bit about your childhood and where life began for you.
Yeah. I mean, hindsight is 2020, and I start looking. I reflect all the time and kind of look back, and there were certain people that I encountered in my life that, like really was trying to help me to see that the life that I was leading, that I could do better. I have a saying that a lot of times, we know better, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it gives us the tools to do better. And so, like, as you were kind of talking about that, because you're right, I have a very intense story of shame, and that kind of kept me from really being able to share or to talk about the things that I was going through. And so it did cause me to become a very closed off person. And I didn't have that compassion for people. Like, it's taken a lot of reflecting and looking back and really truly asking myself, like, what is my purpose here, to kind of figure out, like, who I'm destined to be. And for me, that is helping people. That is trying to turn back around and carry other people's burdens. Growing up. So, as you said in my bio, I am enrolled. I'm an enrolled member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. So I'm Native American. I grew up here. It's I mean, technically it's a reservation, but it's really, the proper name for it is a Qualla boundary where we live. And so I don't know if anybody's ever read any, like, there's an author, his name's Sherman Alexie, and he has, like, when I'm reading his books, I'm like, this is our childhood. This is exactly how we grew up here on the res. But yeah, it just came from a very low income family. My dad, he was in the Army. My mom, she later on in life became a paramedic. So, like, when you hear the way that I was raised in a good household. My parents, they did the best that they could with us. We, we were taught values. We were taught, the importance of, like, becoming independent, or, we were taught to work hard for the things. Like, we were given work ethic. We were taught leadership skills. We were taught the importance of family and being there for one another. So I grew up in a very loving home, but there were also things that were happening in the background that, for me, it just kind of seemed normal. Like, I would tell myself, well, a lot of the other families that I was growing up around, or my cousins, or, everybody kind of grew up that way, it seemed. And now, like, later on in life, I'm like, okay, maybe this wasn't so normal. But, there was some dabbling and substances. My parents, would be smoking weed or drinking, and we were exposed to that kind of thing. And so, just growing up, it seemed normal. So, like I said, my parents, they did work really hard to take care of us. I am the middle child of my brother. I have an older brother and a younger sister. So I always say, like, I grew up with the middle child syndrome. Like, I felt like I always had to do all the cooking and the cleaning because my sister was too young. She was the baby, or my brother. I mean, I was the oldest girl, so I felt like he got treated like the king around the house. And so I just felt like I was just stuck. I was always trying to fight for acceptance. But so that leads me to like just kind of like my parents always being busy. And unfortunately, I was subject to sexual abuse from a cousin, from a family member. And that happened because like my mom and dad, they would have to work all the time. And so they would have to take us to my aunt's house. And um, I was honestly, and this is, just how, as I've been learning in the field and with the people that I work with, like I've learned how trauma works and rewires your brain. And so I can't very like a very set in stone say like I was this age. I just know that I probably had to be like in between 4 to 6-ish, 7 maybe. And so this was happening. And, there were times that I guess like later on, it got to a point where I would start telling my like, no, please, I don't want to go over to my aunt's. And that was, I hate saying that because I love my aunt. My aunt, she's the sweetest woman ever, but she didn't know what was happening. I was at such a young age that I didn't know how to deal with that. And I really didn't realize it at the time, but now looking back, I've been able to, like, throughout my own healing journey, make some connections with that. I've realized, like, I figured out at a young age, like, how to hide my feelings, because, I didn't want to be the cause of trouble or like a burden. I was, like I said, I was the middle child. So I was constantly trying to keep the peace. Like if we had to clean, I was the one that did it because I just wanted things to be okay. And so I buried it, I honestly, but sure, like this is, I've within the past 2 years is when and I'm 33 now. And I've just started openly talking about it and being able to share about it. Like even before, I would just call it. Like I couldn't even say I was sexually abused, and I think that's just an all too common story for people that experience that. And so, anywho, as time goes along, I was a bigger, heftier kid. I was very critical of myself. I was really, really hard on myself. I had really like low self-esteem. And I really just think that the one thing that I could control, because my life felt so out of control because of that experience and that sexual abuse, I could control what I ate, and if I wanted to eat a whole bag of potato chips, then I would do that. And unfortunately, it caused me to get picked on a lot. I got bullied in school. And so I was just always like felt like I didn't belong. I had friends. I'm not going to try to make it seem like I didn't have friends, but um, kids can be mean. And so as another thing that I could control. So when I was actually in the 4th grade, I remember going to my cousin, his graduation, and I seen the valedictorian, and it was a girl. I was like so pumped. I was so inspired by that. I was like, man, I turned to my dad and I remember seeing this girl giving her speech, and I was like, I want to do that, Dad. I want to be that person. And he told me, he said, you can. He said, you have to work hard in school, but do what you can, and you can do that. And so like I did do that. Like I was really smart. Books just came naturally. Schoolwork came very natural to me. And so that was like the other thing. Like I felt like I could control. Was doing good in school and getting that approval from my teachers, my parents. It just felt good to receive the awards and accolades and to basically earn, like I felt like to get the acceptance that I was had the desire for, like I had to work hard. I had to earn it. Like the things in life you have to work hard for, which I'm not saying that's a bad way to look at life. I'm just saying that it's now I realize that my worth isn't dependent upon grades or, the awards or those types of things. So whenever I was 12, that's the first time that I used. I started smoking and drinking with some kids, and really just, I mean, peer pressure kind of went down the road of just continuing to do that. I started working at a really young age, and so being able to have my own money, I was like able to access drugs more, and being and working. Really, I started hanging out with older people, and so that kind of like
Yeah.
just opened.
That opened up a
Yeah,
door for you. I want to ask, before we kind of keep going here, you mentioned your parents a few times, and like, my curiosity is being sparked here because your dad was in the military, your mother was a paramedic. So I see disciplinarian on one side and I see a lot of compassion on the other side. Am I reading that right?
for the most part, yes, but there's also, I mean, my my mom comes from a generation where I'm not going to say she wasn't compassionate. She's very loving. She has, and sometimes, I feel like that's kind of where I get my desire to want to help people. I mean, I wanted to go into the health field I told her whenever I was young, I was like, I want to become a paramedic like you. And, she responded and was like, no, you're not. You're going to be more than I was. You're going to become a doctor. And so, like, I knew, like, there were these really, really high expectations. And, like, I just felt like I had to keep setting the bar higher and higher. And, but she, I have an understanding that she grew up in a generation where affection, it's just hard for her to kind of show the emotions. I honestly would say my dad, I'm a big daddy's girl, but he was it's
Yeah.
like he's the kind of more compassionate side. But people
Wow.
hear
Okay.
military and just automatic, that's a common thing.
Yeah, I mean, I hear military and I think, disciplinarian or just, a lot of structure and organization. And, I have to imagine, a lot of times in relationships, you see that kind of attraction to the opposite side,
Mhm.
right? Like where it's one of them is really disciplined, one of them is really, slightly more OCD, and then the other one is a little bit more carefree. I mean, I not relevant to this conversation, but in my marriage, I'm the more OCD one, and my wife is a little bit more carefree. But anyway, that's that's a sidetrack, not relevant to this conversation. But I guess what I really want to dig into with regards to the dynamic with your parents, you alluded earlier to the fact that you know and you didn't really go into too much detail. Like, they would drink, they'd smoke some weed, but was it at a level that was problematic, or was it, just kind of like them winding down and maybe not necessarily looking around to see, well, like, are we setting a good example for our
Yeah,
kids?
yeah,
Was it
it
like that?
wasn't crazy. Like, I mean, you'll be interviewing my my husband, and his parents are definitely a total, like, probably problematic. But
Got it. Got it.
I will say though, it was more like just winding down, the family coming over, hanging out. But for me, it just kind of made when I was presented with the option, I was like, well, my whole family does it, so
My
it's
whole family does it. Yeah, no, I understand that. So, before we carry on, the last question I have is, you mentioned the middle child syndrome, right? And um, obviously it's apparent, and it translates in a lot of middle children out there. But were you conscious of it at the time? Did you feel ignored? Did you feel like you were never going to get, the attention of the baby or the adoration of the older child at a young age? Or was it kind of more natural that perhaps you were just naturally just in the middle, kind of living your life, and no one was paying attention?
Yeah, I think it's more of the natural side of things. Yeah, I will say my older brother probably he was the first everything. He was like the first grandkid, the first of the whole family.
I'm the oldest. I was the first grandkid. I understand all about that, and that's definitely something that I can relate to, and I understand, and yeah, I can't imagine not
I'm
having it be
feisty
that way.
though.
But
I have to tell you, I was fiery. Like with I did not. I was the rebel. I was like the order. If you tried to put me in a box, I was like, it's not happening this way. If my brother tried to tell me to do things, I was like, nope.
I do think that middle children tend to be, they have so much to absorb, right? Because again, they're not necessarily always the center of attention. And so if they're not the center of attention, it allows them to kind of just be aware and to kind of soak it all in, and to point out the mistakes of the older and the younger, and to kind of learn how to pivot around it. And in a way, I think it actually, you know it sets them up for success, if they're playing the long game. This is not really based on anything outside of observation that I've seen with other middle children. But I also think, and my wife would hate me for saying this because she's the youngest, but I think middle children tend to be the funniest.
I agree.
uh I think they tend to be the funniest because they have to self-deprecate sometimes, right? Like, you have to kind of, laugh at yourself, especially when you kind of look at the broader situation, and you kind of think like, this is stupid, that, like, this syndrome, if you will. Uh, but okay, so now we have the background. We understand where you were, in terms of the landscape of your family. We dug a little bit further into your parents. You're 12 years old. You're working. Were you working, out of necessity or out of
Well, I
choice?
didn't start working until I was 14, but
14, excuse me. Yeah,
no, that
sorry.
was just by choice. Well, actually, we did work. So we actually worked as kids. There's a outdoor theater here called the Drama, and it's a play, and so we were like stage, like just like extra cast, and didn't have speaking parts or anything, but like we were like 9 and 10, and because they had to have kids in the scenes, and anywho, just at a young age, honestly, we were taught like my mom, she would be like, if you want brand name stuff, use your money, because we'd be saving all summer. And I'm telling you, like as a kid, if you had Walmart kid shoes on or something, you got made fun of. So I was like, fine, I would go buy like 2 outfits, and then I'd be mad because like my sister would have 10 outfits. And I'd be like, how did you make your money work like that? But just at a young age, we were always taught to work for the things that we wanted. I did kind of skip. I forgot to mention by the time I was 12, and this is another thing too. I didn't realize really affected me was my parents did get divorced, and so that was another time in my life where I really tried to act like I had control of what I was feeling. And so I was like, I would just pretend like it wasn't bothering me, but really deep down, it was not fun having to go back and forth between households. We had to move in with my mom, which that was pretty traumatic with me, having to leave from my dad's, because that was that was my best friend. I was really close with my dad. He just got to where he couldn't take care of us financially anymore, and my mom could. So we had to move in with her, growing up, single mom raising us at that time. And so, yeah, I was 12 whenever I first used, and then I continued to use, started working when I was 14, and started hanging out with older people, started going to parties, and, just was introduced to like more, to harder drugs. So like pills came along, God, craziness, cocaine, much, like a bunch of just wild stuff. I was wild when I was young. Uh,
Was there a drug of choice?
Opioids, pills. That was definitely the what I gravitated towards. So by the time I was 15, I was like actively seeking and buying pills from people. And it was like when I was in school, like I had this way to justify it, right? Like I would, so my goal was to graduate valedictorian. And I would tell myself, like, if your grades start dropping, then you got a problem. And not even realizing, like, the whole time I was kind of shifting myself further and further down into addiction. And I was playing sports. I played basketball, I played volleyball. I was all like any extracurricular activity, I was doing it. I went to, it's called governor's school when I was 16. You had to like apply to go to the school, like, and I did it purposely because I knew it would look good on college, like when I started applying for schools. And so, class president, I was always in some kind of role, right? And so, like that, I justified. I was like, well,
So you were doing all this
yeah,
at
I was,
once. You were doing drugs, playing sports, and keeping up with your
yeah,
schoolwork all
doing
at
all
once?
of it. And my grades never started falling. And so I was like, all right, you're fine. And I'm not saying that to like,
It sounds to me like you were running away from a lot, like you were just keeping busy all the time, and if it wasn't drugs, it was sports, and if it wasn't sports, it was academics, and, the other thing that also kind of, like, I wanted to call out was, at did you had mentioned that at one point you were overweight. Did that ever kind of even out because of the
yeah.
drugs?
So actually, whenever I was going into ninth grade as a freshman, I was like, I'm done being picked on. And I mean, honestly, like it kind of evolved into this person that I thought that people wanted to be around. Like I felt like, and I realize now, like I have chronic, like really bad anxiety. So anytime I walk into a room, like the chatter starts going on. But like, and the same was true for me back then. I just didn't realize because I was on drugs all the time. Like whenever I'd take the drugs, I didn't think about what people were thinking about me. I didn't care about like if what they were saying, or if they thought that I was ugly or fat or all these names that I've been called up to this then, right? And so it kind of just like helped me to just turn all of that off, and I thought I was more fun to be around. Thought I was funnier. Like I was just very, very outgoing whenever I would use drugs, and but I'm honestly outgoing without them. But
But it sounds to me like you just never had even a minute to look at yourself in the mirror and ask, like, "Well, who am I?" Like, during this period. Like, you were just kinda going through it all, doing it all, and I feel like, you know, I think your story is gonna continue to build, so we're not even there yet, but I just wanna call out that, for everybody listening to this, especially in that period of life, like, especially during those high school years and when we're, like, developing, and I think now, like, as you think about, like, future generations, it's just something to be really cognizant of when you come across either yourself or, someone you love, just never acknowledging the need to take that moment to, like, look in the mirror, and if you notice that someone around you is, you know, constantly keeping busy, as a friend, like, I think that's a good time to say something. But, I just call that out because it reminds me a little bit of myself at one point in a different context where I would just keep myself busy all the time because I didn't wanna know who the person was. deep within. So let's carry on from there. So now you got all that going on.
Yeah, that was exactly what it was. I was very, very, very ashamed, and it honestly has taken me a long, long time to actually appreciate and genuinely love that person that is in the mirror. So I did end up quitting sports. I quit playing basketball and volleyball. I just got tired of trying to pass drug tests. That was the only reason why. Which is it sucks.
They were drug testing you in high school?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I thought that was a normal thing.
Was that because, drugs were prevalent where you were, or?
I think so. Yeah, I thought that was just like a normal thing for sports and kids to be drug tested.
Maybe I'm forgetting. I don't remember. Maybe I'm forgetting. I don't know. I do obviously know that, like, especially when it comes to opioids, you know, they've been running rampant for a long time. And I'm sure in certain areas it was probably worse than other areas, and maybe, you know, it was done differently with regards to testing. But so now you decide you're gonna step away from sports.
Yeah, so I quit playing sports, and I still did all my school stuff. And so when I was 15, I had got into a really bad fight with my mom and ended up moving back in with my dad. And so let me preface this, because I still struggle. Like, these are just facts. This is what happened in my story. I don't share my story to try to like degrade anybody, but this is just, this is what happened. After I moved in with my dad, just things got really out of hand. Like he kind of was in his own mess himself. And so like I could have parties at my house, he would be going out and to his own friends to parties on the weekends and stuff. And so like my spot become the hangout spot. And so anywho, that's, that was what high school was like for me. I started dating an older guy, which I'm not blaming anything on him, but that was the worst thing that could have happened for me. I did graduate valedictorian, class of 2009. And that was the last time that I actually felt like proud of myself. I actually felt like I had accomplished things in life. But like I told you, I was using pills since I turned 15. And so that gradually kept increasing and increasing. So by the time that I graduated when I was 18, me and the older guy that I was with, we were heavily using oxycodone. And so, that is a very, very powerful, addictive painkiller. And so right after I graduated, like I always wanted to go to Chapel Hill. I'm a big Carolina fan. But instead, I decided to go to a school that was like 30 minutes away from here so I could commute back and forth. It's not a bad school. It's a great school, actually. It's a university, and I went for like 2 months into my first semester, and then I ended up dropping out. And that was like a really pivotal point for me. Like, that was the first time that I honestly, like, other than sports, but that was like, for academically, that was the first time that I had ever just gave up. And I knew by that point that I was really diving in really deep with the drugs. Me and the guy, we just continued to use till we were broke all the time. And, I was always borrowing money from my family. And it got to the point where, like, I just felt like they didn't want me around because I was the person. So like I have an aunt, and she's the only person that I really seen growing up that had a similar drug problem like I did. And I remember when I was growing up, I was like, man, I really, I remember how it was whenever she would come around. And so like during that time, I had this realization. I was like, I've done the same thing. Like I went down the same path as my aunt, and because she was, she was addicted to methamphetamines, and I was doing the same thing. And it got very, very bad after that. I mean, that's how addiction is. You make these justifications where you're like, well, as long as I'm not doing this, or as long as I'm not shooting up, or as long as I'm not stealing, as long as I'm not doing this, then I'm okay. It's like, I'm better. I don't know how to explain it. Like you just feel like you're a little bit better of an addict than the next, which is, it's just a way to try to justify your use. So,
So you were just about like 18, 19 at this time, right? Because you only went to college for 2 months. Were you living with this guy
yeah,
now?
we were living together.
You and this guy were how far apart in age were you?
He was 25.
Okay.
Yeah, so I,
So he's about 6, 7 years older than you.
yeah, and
7
I
years older than
started
you.
dating him though before I even, like, I was still in high school when I started talking to this guy.
Got it.
Um,
Got it. Was there anyone? I mean, you know what what really fascinates me is the fact that it's really hard to be valedictorian. It's really hard to be valedictorian, and you were valedictorian. I mean, how big was your school?
it wasn't like my graduating class. I think we had 74 people. I come from a little school.
Still, I mean, like you're still number 1 of 74 people, and you're doing it, while you're abusing drugs, and you're carrying on an emotional relationship, with someone who's, significantly older than you for that period of life, and, like you're navigating it, and that kind of tells me that like you have some innate ability to really execute. um it's just more around the fact that I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, you got to college, and it was almost like this burden was kind of let off because like you said, you set that goal to become valedictorian, you did it, and then you didn't have another goal in front of you, and you also had the appetite of the drugs, and the allure of the drugs, and so now if you have to choose, kind of a goal with no real end in sight versus what's in front of you, and kind of, the instant gratification, I could see why you would choose the instant gratification. um and so I like, I don't want to interrupt you because I think your story like needs to be told, in its entirety. But the reason for my interjections is because I want to give the audience things to think about along the way with regards to understanding what may have been going on in your head as you were making certain decisions, and why perhaps. And again, I don't want to move too far away from the topic, but I feel like I've seen this before with a lot of people who, in particular, that switch from being valedictorian in high school to going to college. Not in the same context as you. Your story is incredibly unique, and but I have seen the pressure that takes to get to that point in high school, and then you all of a sudden kind of find yourself in college, and it doesn't necessarily prepare you for that. So carry on from there.
so yeah, so I'm in this relationship with the older guy, and uh dropped out, and really just kind of started losing the connection with my family. I just chose to stay away after a time, because I knew, like, I really just all circles back around to shame. I felt very ashamed. I felt like I let them down. I felt like I had disappointed them, and they did not like the guy that I was dating. I mean, he wasn't a good guy anyways. And so being Native American, we get we call it our big money. So we have a casino, and from birth until we turn 18, you have to graduate to get it. But the money, there's like a per capita check that comes out from the funds from the casino. It gets put into a trust fund. And so when you turn 18, you get handed, well, they kind of have different stipulations around it now, but whenever I got mine, they just like handed me this large lump sum of like $80,000. And so for me, that was like lights, like, let's go. It's time to party. Like, everybody's my friend. So let's all just continue this long party until I literally just dwindled the whole thing away. Didn't have anything to show for it. And me and the guy, we ended up, we went separate ways. And honestly, after that, like, things just got really bad for me, because then I was so addicted. And by then, I started shooting up. And I
Where were
started
you
going to
living?
jail. I was living at friends' houses. I was just bouncing from place to place.
Were you homeless at any point?
I mean, I didn't have my own apartment or
You didn't have a
anything.
house.
Yeah, like,
Yeah.
I was just, and a lot of time, because for me, that's my experience was like, if you had drugs, then typically, like, if someone who did have a house that was using, they'd let you crash, or like I could stay in a room or something, but most of the time I was just bouncing from place to place. We call it sofa surfing.
Got it. So you were about to mention. So then, how
I
did you go
started
to
going to
jail?
jail. So that's the first time I went to jail was because of shoplifting. I was boosting to try to get my fix. And then when I started shooting up, it got really bad. Just being around other people, they're like, "Hey, you should try it this way," and I loved it. I completely fell in love with it. And whenever you start, it's a whole different ball game. Like, you start going through withdrawals, like your body aches, and it's literally one of those things where you feel like if you don't have it, then you literally like can't breathe. That's your oxygen. And so yeah, that was the first time I went to jail. And jail's terrible. Like, jail is the worst place for an addict to go. Someone that's a person who's using, that's the worst place to go, because really, honestly, you're just kind of surrounded by other people who just can't wait to get out to start using again, or you meet dealers, or you meet, and so each time I went to jail, it like I'd come out and I'd have this new plug, or I'd have this new like I just really lost all my values that I had. And I started selling drugs. I ended up getting into a really bad car wreck. I had stole somebody's car. It was like just a really bad drug deal gone wrong. And I was just so high, not making rational decisions. And this was 2016. But
So you
no, it
were
had to be
25.
2015. Yeah, I was 25.
So you're about 25. How long were you in jail when you were in
So
jail?
I mean, it just was like one in
Like
and
in and
out,
out?
or I'd do like six. I did a 6 month stint here, and that was for having possession, for having pills on me, and then like another time I did 4 months, and
Did anyone ever visit you when
they
you were in jail?
could. My parents were about the only people that ever came to visit me. Actually, yeah, they were the only people that came. And they try to talk to me about getting help, and I genuinely, like, during the times that I would be in jail, and like the desire was there. It's really hard if you've never struggled with it yourself. It's kind of hard for people to wrap their minds around it, because for me to sit here and say like the desire for me to stop using was there, but then to get out just to go right back to it, like it's like, well, that doesn't make sense. You said the desire was there, but it's not that easy. I would get out and then I could simply run into somebody, or get on my phone and reach out to old friends, like, because one thing that I found was, even though the community that I was running around with was not a good positive one, it was still a community for me. Like when I couldn't go to Thanksgiving, or I couldn't go home for Christmas, or I was missing birthdays, like I still had this band of
They took you
people
in.
that it just was in
Yeah.
a really unhealthy way.
Hey all, it's me, Bishoy. As a marathon runner and endurance athlete, I've come to understand the importance of properly fueling your body for preparation and recovery. Every day, you get a shot at success. How you start your day typically paints a picture of what the rest of the day will look like. Start your day with a super convenient, healthy, and delicious nutritional win. Meal 1 by Creatures of Habit. Overnight oatmeal packed with 30 grams of plant-based protein, chia, flax, and pumpkin seeds. Vitamin D3, omega-3s, a probiotic, and digestive enzymes, made in under 1 minute. Stop wasting time or worrying about what to eat as your first meal of the day. Start with meal 1. Visit creaturesofhabit.com, creatures spelled with a K, and use code MILE40 for 15% off a one-time purchase or the first subscription order payment. Let me ask you your input on this, since you experienced this with regards to just the overall system. Was there any element of rehabilitation during that 6-month stint? Or was it just merely you counting down the time and just kind of going back out there and doing what you always did? Was like there any, from an institutional perspective, was there any element of like incorporating something in you, whether it's, I can't speak to it. I mean, I have to really kind of lean on you here to kind of educate the audience so they understand, someone in your shoes, you're caught for possession, you're put away for 6 months. Does the system do anything to rehabilitate you?
Not that during that time, the place, I will say that there were other efforts made, but in the county jail where I was at, I mean, there was the occasional church group that came, and that had the potential that could have changed my life, right? Like I could have had this radical moment where, like, I was just like, I don't want to do this anymore. But I feel like, no, it does no justice. I mean, it gets me off the streets for that time, and my mom, she could go to sleep at night knowing that her daughter was safe. That was a big, difficult part. It was, my mom writing me a letter and telling me that, at least when she knew that I was in jail, that she knew that if she had to go on a call to go pick up a female, that it wasn't going to be her daughter that time, So yeah, I just don't think county jails, things like that. No, there could definitely be a lot more that could be done to try to help people to do something different, because they're in an environment where they do have a clean, sober mind, and can actually make rational decisions. But
That's why I asked, more so out of curiosity. I mean, you hear everything with regards to the improvements that need to be made to just the overall system, but you know, as someone who's had no experience with it, I have no idea what that means and at what levels that means. I do understand that there's a need for, incorporating more rehabilitation, but I don't know where and when that gets played. And then I look at someone like you who, was dealing with this from such a young age. And I feel like with the right intervention, you maybe would have had a shot at seeing the light sooner than you did. but what do I know? Like, I'm just kind of saying this from a third party who's kind of like just kind of trying to add it up. So, you know, let's carry on. So now you talk about you stole the car. What happened? What happened from there?
Oh yeah. So that was during winter time, and things had gotten pretty bad. I'm kind of like, I feel like I'm rushing through this. I'm like jumping away. But by that time uh I was doing heroin. So it had graduated, there was times when I would go to jail, like in jail. Honestly, there was one time I went to jail. I had never tried meth and was in a county jail surrounded by girls that all they did was meth, and that's all they talked about. So by the time I was getting out, I went and done meth. And so, I mean, it just seemed like each time that I went to, like, it just gradually progressed worse and worse and worse. And so I was on heroin by this time. And but still, yeah, I mean, opioids, painkillers was my main go-to. That person shows up to retrieve their car back, and I was just so high on meth and heroin. I jumped in the car and I took off. And this is January 26th, and we live in the mountains, so it was extremely cold, and it had actually been snowing. And so, like, I was coming around a curve and I hit black ice. And so it like slings me straight into this tree. And I remember like bracing to the left side of my body and like really placing my foot down really hard on the floorboard, just kind of like, oh my God, like I seen I was going into the tree. And so I ended up breaking my leg, both the bones in my lower leg. Um, I didn't realize at the time, but I had fractured my L1 and fractured the left side of my hip. And so the people that were chasing me in the car, like the girls who had set me up, and then there was the people who came to retrieve their car, they caught up, and I was just like, here's your car, whatever, it's wrecked, I'm out of here, I got to get out of here. And it's terrible. That's one of my biggest regrets is ever doing that. I wish, even to this day, like I wish I could give that person a car or something, but I just don't have a car to give them. But anyhow, the girl who helped set me up I paid her to help me lead the scene of the accident. And the number one thing I was scared of, I mean, yeah, I was scared of getting arrested because I stole a person's car. I was more scared that my mom was going to show up on the ambulance. So I was like, I got to get out of here. And so she took me. I left the scene and I was like, I can't tell. I was like, you got to take me to a hospital in another state. Like, I can't go in. And finally, my friends were like, you've lost your mind. We're taking you to the nearest hospital. And so they took me and carried me in and left. And so I ended up having, they actually took me to another hospital nearby where they had to do emergency surgery and placed a metal rod in my lower left leg. And so, and it wasn't until like the next day when I was actually able to get a hold of family and tell them like that I was in the hospital and what had happened. And so I ended up having to stay in a rehabilitation center. And I think I stayed there like a week and a half, maybe almost 2 weeks. And I just bounced. I knew they were going to prescribe me painkillers. I had just went through this extensive surgery and I was like, I got to go. They taught me how to move with a walker. I was on a walker and I left AMA and went right back to the lifestyle. And honestly, Bashort, like the first thought was like, I'll be able to legally get painkillers for the rest of my life now. I was like happy. I wasn't thinking like, thank God I'm still here to see, to thank God I'm still living and breathing. I was just like, I'm going to get pain pills for the rest of my life. And
Oh man,
um
I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy to think that, but I almost can't blame you, like for thinking that. But it's crazy to think about it because you think about all the people out there who are not addicts who, you know, who appreciate pain medicine, especially when going through surgery. And so I cannot imagine, I imagine that being at a, you know, times 1,000 level for you, because I think your biggest obstacle when you are an addict, I don't want to misspeak. One of the biggest obstacles if you are an addict is the access. And now you have free access.
Yeah, that's literally it. Like you're trying to constantly figure out how to get how it can be accessible. And so when you're in a position and you think like legally I can do this and I'll be fine, it's like a whole nother ball game. But thank God I didn't get to that point. I never went to a pain clinic. I never got prescribed other than leaving the hospital. Not because I chose to quit, but because I went to prison right after that.
So now for this is for the car incidents. Now you're in prison for the
No,
car
I
incident.
not I no,
Oh
I
no,
honestly don't know. Sorry. I don't know what
no.
I never got charged with that. Crazy enough story. But
So let's just hope the statute of limitations is up on that one for anyone listening to the podcast. Okay, so this is not an endorsement. Do not try that at home.
yes, thank you.
Okay, so now what did you end up going to prison for this time?
For drugs again.
Just for
Yeah, I
drugs
got
again. Okay.
out and started dealing again and selling and actually had a lot of meth. When I got arrested and taken to the police station, I had a lot and actually got charged with having it on a jail prison institution. And so went.
Is that a
Oh
felony?
yeah, and I got charged with trafficking. And so that's what I went to prison for. And I just, I remember sitting on that bus. They put you on a bus and they really do ship you out. And I just remember thinking, like, how the heck did I go from most likely to succeed to sitting on this prison bus, And so I did 8 months in prison. I'd already had some time served on that when I actually got sent to prison. And so ended up getting out on parole. This was back in 2017. I got out I spent, I spent 8 months and then got out for a few weeks and had an old charge for Cherokee. Thank God, because I did get out and start using again. And at that time, pills it was really hard to find pills. And so I had to like buy heroin. But like, I really think that this was when fentanyl was starting to come out. And I don't know if like the stuff that I was buying just had fentanyl in it, but it was getting bad. Like the 2 days before went to jail for the last time, the 2 days before that, I overdosed twice in one day. And that's how bad, I really and feel it in my heart. Like I wasn't intentionally doing fentanyl. I just think that it was being cut into the drugs that I was using. But it was so strong, and I knew, like, when I tell you, okay, so like I had started using again, and I literally was like, I knew I was running from my parole officer. I was like, I'm going to end up going back to prison if I don't, straighten up. And I had messaged some family members, and I was crying because I was like, I'm too scared to message my mom, but maybe you can help. And then by the time they would message me back, it was like, it's so fleeting, And so whenever I overdosed twice in that one day, I overdosed that morning. My friends, like, I woke up in a shower. They had threw me in a bathtub and turned the cold water on to try to get me back to come back and awake. And I think they Narcaned me. I'm pretty sure they did. But it was like And they were like, please, Katelynn, like, stop doing this. Like, just stop. And so in my mind, I was like, okay, yes, I see I must die. Like, I'll stop, but it's not that easy. And so, like, later on that evening, I was in tears. I was literally in tears because I was starting to get sick. And I knew, like, the only way that I was going to stop that sickness was to do another dose. And so I was, like, literally crying, doing it again. And then, boom, overdosed again and woke up in the shower again. So 2 days later, I went to court late. And thank God, because the judge ended up, I thought, like, he would strike my caught and failed, but he ended up like doubling my bond to like 180,000. And I was like, okay, I'm not getting out of this one. And so I knew I was going to go to jail again. And they ended up giving me mandatory jail time. This was like my last trafficking charge that I had. They gave me mandatory jail time, and then with the opportunity to get out on an ankle monitor. And then I had to be on supervised probation after that ankle monitor came off. And so I did my time, and that was the last time that I had ever used. So I always say that February 9th, 2017 was that's like when my sobriety started. And, you know, whenever I was in jail that last time, I don't know why, but I just feel like I had a friend. We were pretty close in active addiction. And I feel like God was speaking to her. I really do think that God uses people. And I feel like there were numerous times as I was telling my story, like, I can look back and be like, okay, like, he was probably speaking to me. I just didn't have the ears to listen, you know? And so I had this friend, and she wrote me a letter, and she said, Katelynn, will you please, when you get out, promise me that you will not use again? And I don't understand it. I don't. My mom asked me to make that same promise. My dad, my sister, my family members, they all asked me to make that same promise in the past, and I couldn't do it. I could not do it for them. But in that moment, like, I made that promise to her, and it was just different. Like, I felt like things were different for me. I wasn't calling the dope dealers no more. I wasn't calling my homies. I was calling her and my family. And every time I talked to her, I'd be like, what are you doing? And she'd be like, oh, I'm out here. I'm going to church, or I'm going to dinner with my family, or I'm going to this meeting. And I'd be like, oh, well, that's cool. And so, like, I started to miss life, for the first time. I was like, I really want to do, not the first time, because the desire was there, but this was different. I was like, I really want to get out and do better this time. And I don't know if it's because I got out with an ankle monitor on, but when I got out, I went back to my mom's, and I couldn't go nowhere. My PO was like, nope, you got to prove yourself. And so I started doing things, started going to substance abuse treatment classes, and started building a different kind of community. And they were loving, they were loving, they were very caring, they were compassionate, they weren't judgmental, because we had this understanding. We had this understanding of, like, shared pain, and that's the thing with being in recovery. Like, any person that can go through the depths of addiction and face pain and sorrow and suffering like that and come out on the other side, like, you just have this genuine shared experience of, like, and an understanding of being like, this person right here has been through some hard stuff, and so it just allows us to have a lot more gratitude for the things that we're doing in life. And I'm not like trying to compare people or anything like that. I just know, like, that during that time that was what I needed. was this community of support and people to love me and be like, you know what? Even though you done some really awful things, Katelynn, like you're forgiven and you can build your life back up from that, and you don't have to continue to walk around and stay in this shame hole, you know? And so that's kind of how, I ended up meeting my husband, Caleb, was at substance abuse treatment classes. It's funny because our counselor,
like every love
yeah, it's
story
like they
usually
tell you
starts.
not to do that.
So interesting. Wow. Okay. So I just want to go back to the girl who wrote the letter to you. You still in touch with her?
So we are not, we're cordial. We're definitely not the close friends that we once were. I mean, we see each other, we're always very supportive of each other, but just different circumstances happened and kind of like made us go separate ways and start living our own separate lives. But I'm so proud of her. Anytime I see her, the things she's doing on Facebook, like I always give her praise because she played a very big pivotal moment in my life, and I'm forever grateful and thankful for that because I don't know why it was her, but she's the one that got through to me, and I honestly don't think I would not be here today had that moment not happened, because I was on the road to killing myself fast.
Yeah, man. Now you got me all choked up a little bit here with regards to it, because one of the things about the way that you tell this story was it seemed like it clicked and you knew where you were going to go from there. Not saying you had it all figured out, but you knew you were now headed in the right trajectory. Again, for educational purposes, was there, a lot of pain or withdrawal involved in this, or was a lot of that withdrawal while you were
Oh,
in
that
jail?
happened while I was in jail. And that's the thing. That's the hardest part. Is like, and that usually is what keeps people using, is because you get really sick, like your whole body aches, you can vomit, you can just be like really nauseous, and it feels like your skin's crawling. But it only lasts for like a week, sometimes a little bit longer. It depends on how hard and how long you've been doing the drugs. But yeah, after that, I was fine. So upon coming out, no, I was fine.
You were good to go. You were at that point, it was more mental. Like, can you remain disciplined, and can you, focus on this new life that you've been given and kind of make the most of it? I mean, I'm sure being on an ankle monitor doesn't necessarily it might make things a little bit easier to avoid getting yourself into trouble, but at the same time, psychologically, I'm sure that also plays a role with regards to how you navigate your life from there. So for the listeners, I am bringing on Caleb directly following this episode. So I actually love that we're at this part of the story now, because what you're going to listen to when you hear, the upcoming episode with Caleb on it is how these two worlds came together. And so let's talk about how you guys connected, and how things have blossomed since.
So Caleb, he's my best friend. I love him so much. Whenever he first came into recovery, he got out of jail. I knew him in addiction, but he was kind of we did not hang out. We did not, like, that was just not, we weren't in the same friend groups and things like that. So, but whenever I seen that he had gotten out of jail and was, stated he wanted to, very publicly said he was going to be in recovery as well, I knew how important it was to have support and have a community, right? And so I would just, try to give him, like, be his friend and try to give him words of encouragement and just share like how I done it, not necessarily to be like, this is how you need to do it, but that was just one of the things that I learned, especially going to meetings, is like we share our strengths and our hopes, right? And we give it away, give it to the next person, because it may not be how they're going to do it, but they can pull different things from that, right? And so we just had this friend group that just really supported each other. And Caleb, he come out of jail wide open. I will say that he has challenged me in so many different ways. But now, being where we are today, like, I'm so thankful for it. Back then I wasn't, because I was the very, your typical, like, go to AA meetings or go to NA meetings, go have dinner. I come out of jail bloated and huge. Like, I was over 200 pounds and just I felt uncomfortable in my skin. I shared earlier how I struggled with my weight as a kid and always
Youngster.
struggle with
Yeah.
self-esteem. And Caleb comes out and, does this half Ironman and like 6 weeks out of jail. And it was very inspiring, but not to the point where I was like, I'm going to go do one. It was just cool to see somebody doing that. And I was like, as the recovery community, we should band and really rally around each other and support each other and things like that. And so, like, as our friendship grew, he did challenge me. I'd be like, well, I want to lose weight. And so he would encourage me and be like, well, do that. How are you going to do that? And so, I started eating healthier. And once we started dating, it was just like his endeavors just kind of like, when you're in a you're married, when you're in a relationship, you support each other and what your passions are and what your goals are. And so, like, I was very much so the person, if he's had the vision, I'd be like, all right, let's figure out how to do it, And so I don't know how much I should share, because it's his story to share, but
Well, okay, so I do want to give him his
yeah.
flowers, if you will, to let him share his version of the story. But why don't you keep it at a high level, speaking to elements that really
Okay.
impacted you, right? So, like, without going too much detail about him, talk about yourself and some of the things that you experienced, because I think the audience is gonna be incredibly proud to hear how this story
Yeah.
goes.
So, okay, I could definitely do that. So, just being with him and seeing the really awesome and amazing things that he's done truly impacted me. So, so he's a runner. We're both runners, and we're both, love to do ultra kind of style, ultra marathon events and things like that. But I will say that truly came from just me being around him and going to different races with him. And I didn't really understand why. I was like, who wants to go run a half marathon? Like, who wants to go do a trail race like that? Like, it was not something that was on my radar. But once I got out there and just being in, as a spectator or as a crew at helping him, I really seen, like, just the true love and the support that community shows for each other. I fell in love. I was like, all right. So I started signing up for races. And you have to remember, like, so before I actually even started running, like, Caleb would try to encourage me to exercise and lose weight, and I'd be like, I can't run because I had that metal rod put into my leg, and so I kind of used that as a crutch for a long time. And I finally, like, the first time I ran on a treadmill, I ran like half a mile, and I caught him. And I was like, guess what I just did? Like, I was so pumped. But it's cool. It's cool to have somebody in your life to want that for you, and then to have somebody that you just get excited about things with. And he was that for me. And so I started signing up for some races with him. I'd do some 5Ks, which it just starts growing more into more. Like, I remember being on a podcast with him before, and I was like, I have no desire to ever run 100 miler. And then I just completed my first 100 miler last year, and so it's
Incredible.
just doing things like I've seen him put himself through adversity. I've listened to him. I've learned a lot from him and just other people. And I've been curious, I was like, but I have to give a lot of credit to him. It's definitely due, because he would plant seeds, and that's why he's such a good coach today, because like he I swear, like, he could plant a seed, and whatever he says, within a year it will probably happen. And that was the same thing for me, like whenever I completed my a full Ironman, like, he literally was like, I think you could do that. And at first I'm like, no, I couldn't do that. Why? Like, not me. And then the more that I start to turn on and like flip that around my mind, I'm like, why not me? And so I've really been embracing that whole world of, endurance, being an endurance athlete. I feel like it's just kind of set me up for a platform, an even bigger platform, because I do love to help people. I do love to motivate people and inspire people and give them hope, not only with my story, but just like through my compassion and my service work of working with other people, like, who struggle with addiction and things like that. But like, even more so, like, doing these awesome events and these awesome races, because, being Native American, we are the minority, like, we don't have, there are natives, and just being able to be another native going out and trying to put ourselves on the map, like, that for me means a lot, because I know how important it is for the youth to be able to see people and to be inspired. And so, like, if I could do anything to inspire some of the youth, especially our young girls, to like, hey, you could do things like this. That's a big piece of what I do and why I do it. Um, I was thinking earlier of this podcast, and I was like, trying to ask myself, like, why do you like to do, because I had signed up for Tahoe 200 this year, and that for me was like the first time ever where I picked it. I was like, I want to go out and do this. Like, I didn't have to have Caleb there to kind of plant that seed. And that's whenever I kind of realized, like, either you've lost your mind, Katelynn, or you really love this. And I think what I love more about it is, like, I heard so many times, like, I've heard different podcasts where, like Courtney Dauwalter, other people talk about the pain cave, right? And I just remember, like, doing that 100 miler, going into the pain cave, facing that adversity, and just kind of laughing. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, we're going into this.
Because you know what? You've been through worse, Katelynn. Like, that's what I think I really want listeners to kind of pull through this as I'm hearing you speak. Like, you've learned how to endure tribulations. You've practiced endurance your entire life in different ways. And that's the thing, though. Like, people don't realize about endurance sport. It's 80% mental. And like, people take that for granted because they see the image of who they think should be an endurance athlete. But then I see someone like you, and I knew that if you could turn the corner from the tribulations that you had been facing, you undoubtedly were more equipped to be an endurance athlete than someone who's only been training their entire life. And the reason for that is because you've been armed. Like, you've built the muscle that matters the most, and that was your brain enduring what you had suffered through, even if it was self-inflicted. I mean, I get it. Like, when it comes to addiction and drug abuse, a lot of that is in your control. Some of it you can argue is not in your control because of your environment. But that's why I think it's really important to let people live out their course, experience their mistakes, you know, get into those darker moments. And in the case of this podcast, your quote unquote mile 40 moments, and allow yourself to bottom out. Because if you get there, there's only one way forward. And the darker that moment is, the more equipped that you're going to be to carry on from there. And so, I think hearing you talk about it and seeing the joy in your face just lightens me up because, as someone who doesn't know you too well personally, I can't think of someone more equipped for what it is that you're doing right now between you and Caleb. And so I just want to say I'm incredibly proud of you for that. And, as we kind of round things out here, I mean, I asked you at the very beginning, about, what you would potentially title your book. And it's really hard to kind of round this out in a way because there's just so many elements to your story. But, looking back at that 17-year-old version, that valedictorian, if you could have given her, one piece of advice to reroute, what would it have been?
I would tell her that, well, number one, I would tell her that silence equals death, because there was, even though like superficially I had this perfect, like I was putting on this perfect persona, this perfect image, if I could encourage that girl to like just let my guard down, to not have to bear all the weight of trying to do everything perfectly, trying to earn the love and the acceptance that I was searching for. And just to find, like truly find who I am, because in that moment I didn't know, and I would want to tell her like, you're already worth it. Like you don't have to earn the love. You don't have to keep carrying that with you. And I feel like it would have impacted me and turned me towards the path of a journey of healing that, I just was robbed of. I was robbed of that as a child, But and just to know like that I'm not alone, that I didn't have to journey through all that. And I think that was the biggest thing, is like that I've learned now being on my journey, my healing journey, is like failure's okay. Like the 100-miler that I talked about, I DNF'd it the year before, but I learned so much, and I think that I was just so afraid of failure, and I was just so afraid of letting people down, that it just got to be too much, and so I think that there's a lot that we can learn from in the high moments on the mountaintops, just as much as we can learn in the low moments. But it took me a while to start realizing that, like to be okay with not having everything together, and looking at it as like an opportunity to grow. It's in those moments when we grow the most. It's in those moments where we can actually, I don't need to have everything figured out. And that's a good place to be. Like I don't have to be the one with all the answers. I don't want to be the one with all the answers. I'm so thankful that, I have people surrounding me that I can turn to for help, and that I can ask for guidance and wisdom, and I appreciate that from those people from the bottom of my heart. Like I have just some of the most beautiful and pure people in my life now. And those are the kind of people that I want to surround myself with. Like I found my community. I have found my connection.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, you said it perfectly. There's like very little, if anything, I can add to that. But the one takeaway here, if you're a listener, right? Embrace the mistakes, embrace the failure, allow your life to play out and learn, be present, right? And just kind of understand that it's in those moments that the revelations will come and you will better understand how to set yourself up for success. Katelynn, thank you so much. Thank you for everything, for your vulnerability, for just laying it all out here. Good thing is you didn't share too much about Caleb, so we don't have to make sure the stories don't corroborate. But I just want to say thank you. It means a lot to have you on the show, and I'm forever grateful for you sharing your story.
For sure. Thank you so much for having me. It was a blast, and I'm so honored.